Okay, so for the last of this chapter, this is a really short video, just about 10 slides. We will finish the chapter talking about muscle, the 3 types of muscle, and nervous tissue. And we're really just going to introduce some nervous tissues. We'll have a chapter related to this later where we're going to cover a little bit more detail. So same thing with muscle. So muscle tissue, we've talked about epithelial tissue and connective tissue up until this point. The muscle tissue is specialized for contraction. So think about skeletal muscle tissue found in skeletal muscles. And remember, skeletal muscle is an organ. So the muscle tissue is part of that organ, but you can also find connective tissue as well in this organ. Skeletal muscle is elongated and cylindrical. It's banded or striated with multiple nuclei. So to be able to identify this tissue, you'd be looking for these striations, these bands, and I'll show you them here shortly, and a whole bunch of nuclei in one cell. So this one cell, this one skeletal muscle cell that makes up skeletal muscle tissue has more than one nucleus in every cell. Basically that happens because the cells that create skeletal muscle cells, the precursor cells, fuse together, and along with that fusion, they take their nuclei with them. So they're multinucleated. And this skeletal muscle tissue moves and stabilizes your skeleton. Or not moves and stabilizes, moves or stabilizes. Can guard entrances. So you have things, circular layers of muscle called sphincters that you can contract and relax to guard, like your mouth, the anus, the urethra. You have circular layers of muscle that you can kind of contract and you have control over. Same thing with the digestive tract, the respiratory tract, the urinary tract. Those muscles, those circular layers of muscle guards those entrances and exits to those systems, generates heat, and also protects internal organs. Like your abdominal muscles protect the internal organs that are behind it, like the digestive system organs, where you don't have bone to protect it, but you've got muscle. So here's skeletal muscle. These bands are the striations. We'll talk when we talk about muscle what these striations are. This is one muscle cell, long and cylindrical, with striations, those darker bands, and here's one nucleus and two nuclei in the same cell. So multinucleated, striated, and long tubular cells. Cardiac muscle is only found in the heart. So it's super special, super important. The cells are short, not really long like skeletal muscle, and they branch. Unlike skeletal muscle is long, not short, and not branched. But there are striations in both cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle. So the difference here is that cardiac muscle cells are short and branched. Skeletal muscle cells are long and unbranched. Both of them have striations, and cardiac muscle should only have one nucleus. Sometimes there's two, so not that many. Cells are interconnected by way of what's called an intercalated disc. So when one cardiomyocyte, heart muscle cell, remember cardio, myocyte, cardio is heart, myo is muscle, cyte is cell, that table back from chapter 1, have it close by. Cardiomyocytes connect to one another at a specialized junction called an intercalated disc. So two adjacent membranes are held together by a structure called a desmosome and gap junctions. We talked about gap junctions back in the beginning of this chapter. They're cell-to-cell adhesions that create a pore. And desmosomes are a physical connection between two cells. So gap junctions allow basically cardiomyocytes to coordinate contraction. Without them, the heart wouldn't work properly. So one cardiomyocyte can communicate through a gap junction, a pore, from one cell to the next cell to tell it to contract once the first cell has contracted. So the communication between two cardiomyocytes depends upon gap junctions, the connection from one cell to the next that creates a gap or a pore. And that's what helps basically tell those cells to contract and do their job and move blood through the heart and then out into blood vessels. So here's cardiomyocytes. This is one cardiomyocyte. It's short, but it branches. Here's a branch and there's a branch. And where it branches and meets up with another cardiomyocyte, there's an intercalated disc. I think it's pointed out here and here. But this is an intercalated disc. This is an intercalated disc. This is an intercalated disc. In those discs, you can find desmosomes, physical connections from cell to cell membrane, and gap junctions, that pore that gets created by connexins that let basically ions move through. On an actual slide, you can see right here's an intercalated disc. These lines that are perpendicular to the way that the fibers run are intercalated discs. And then here's a nucleus and another nucleus. You can still see striations. Again, this is similar to skeletal muscle, that they have striations. Smooth muscle is the third type of muscle tissue. It's found in the skin. You can find it in the walls of blood vessels. That's what helps blood vessels change their size. In the digestive tract, urinary, respiratory, reproductive tracts, you can find smooth muscle that basically helps line a passageway. And as it contracts, it moves things along those tracks, like the digestive system, the small and the large intestine. Underneath epithelial and connective tissue, there's a layer of smooth muscle. And that smooth muscle contracts and constricts the lumen, makes it smaller, and pushes food forward. The smooth muscle cells are short. They're not striated. So like cardiac muscle tissue and skeletal muscle tissue have striations. Smooth muscle does not. There's one single nucleus at the center of the cell, and they're shaped kind of like an eyeball, or what you can see of an eyeball, so a football maybe. So here's smooth muscle cells. They're tapered at either end. So they taper out and pinch in at either end. One central nucleus, and they taper. So they're kind of a long, thin, not really long, but long and thin, and they taper on each side. So this is smooth muscle. Again, you should know where it's located, how to identify it, and its function. The function of all muscle is to contract and relax. So be a little bit more specific with regard to muscle function. So skeletal muscle function contracts and relaxes to move the skeleton or support tissue underneath it. Cardiac muscle is only found in the heart, and it contracts and relaxes to pump blood throughout the body. And smooth muscle is located in lots of different organs to contract and relax, to move blood forward in blood vessels, to move food forward in the digestive system, lots of different functions there. The last type of tissue we'll talk about, and what will finish chapter 3 finally, is neural tissue. And neural tissue is basically is basically what makes up your nervous system. It's a special type of tissue that can conduct electrical impulses, like electrical wires in your home can conduct electricity. Nervous tissue or neural tissue, the major cell type is neurons, can conduct electrical impulses to communicate from one area of the body to another, like the brain to your fingertips or the brain to your heart. You can communicate by way of neurons that conduct electrical impulses that are carrying a signal. The other type of cell you can find there are called neuroglia or glial cells, and those are just supportive cells. Neurons transfer information from place to place in the body. There's 3 major structures of a neuron we'll look at on the next slide. So if you want to flip to this figure and stay there while I talk about what's on this slide, you can follow me with regard to identification of these structures. Dendrites receive information from other neurons. So here is a dendrite. I'm going to flip back and forth between these slides. There's dendrites. Dendrites, if this is the cell membrane, dendrites are just extensions of the cell membrane that basically poke out or reach out to try to receive information from either another neuron, from typically another neuron. So there's dendrites. If this is a cell body, dendrites are extensions of the cell membrane here. The cell body contains a nucleus, the organelles that are needed to produce chemicals, substances, proteins, steroids, proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates in the cell. And the axon is this long, slender structure here that extends from the cell body all the way out to where the axon ends. And this is a site of connection with another cell. So like this neuron, this site of connection is called an axon terminal, where the axon terminates. That axon terminal may communicate with a dendrite of another neuron. So that's where, like, if you took this cell and made another cell that looked just like this and put dendrites right here, these are the sites of communication from one neuron to another neuron, or one neuron to like a muscle or a gland, some other cell that it can communicate with. So neurons basically produce everything that needs to be produced in the cell body, receive a signal into the cell body by way of dendrites, and then communicate that signal that was received by dendrites along the axon to where it terminates to communicate that signal elsewhere. So that's as far as we're going to go with nervous tissue. And that's what ends chapter 3 officially. We're done with the chapter. There were 5 videos. Not every chapter is going to have 5 videos, I promise. Some of them are short, some of them are long. I think chapter 4 has 2 videos that are about the same length. Watch the videos. You need to take the quiz for chapter 3 and get prepared for exam 1, which is coming up. And there's also a homework associated with chapter 3. So you can log into the My Lab and Mastering in Canvas. And you have to log in through Canvas for the homework to register properly. So go ahead and do that. If you have any problems, let me know. And I'll see you soon.